am very excited to welcome our presenters here today. Winnie Needham from Principia College. Winnie has 17 years of classroom experience in the sixth grade classroom, an additional 3 years as a principal, and currently works in higher education, training the next generation of educators. And Nikki Gamrath, the assistant head of school at the college school in St. Louis. Nikki has a wide variety of experience, whether it's outdoor education, classroom education, school administration, higher education. We have a lot of knowledge and experience to draw from today. So thank you two very much for being here. And without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on over.
Awesome. Welcome, everybody. I can tell you right now that this is experiential for me. The fact that I can't see any of you or feel the energy right now I am out of my comfort zone. So welcome to experiential learning at its finest.
Absolutely. I'm right there with you, Nikki. I am definitely noticing all of the things that are different about this. I'm not a distance learner usually. Well, I'm a distance learner. I haven't been a distance facilitator before. So this is truly an experiment. And it's so fun to see everybody signing in. Thank you. And those are some really hilarious rhymes. So that was a great. Do we want to try and rhyme our names? I think we.
Ooh, yeah, there's some bad ones that rhyme with my name.
I don't think I'll try.
But you all seriously, I saw someone said that quiz gave you anxiety. I hear you. I'm having a little bit of anxiety with this mode as well. So I think we should move along into what drives experiential education in the classroom.
Yeah. And we'll start addressing the things that we just brought up, which are the uncertainty pieces and the anxiety pieces and the bravery that this requires. So this is all going to dovetail nicely.
Yeah. And also just a little context, we are streaming in from St. Louis right now. We're actually in the Commons area at the college school. So wherever you all are coming from, thank you so much for joining. Our learning outcomes today, though.
So we have 2 learning outcomes, but it's very possible that there will be more learning that happens than what we have been able to predict, and that's the whole point of this. Notice that we're intentionally putting in power verbs, like the things that you all will get to do in this presentation. It's not about what we are going to transfer to you. It's about what you're going to get to do with what we're offering today. So identifying the attributes and characteristics of a transformative learning experience. You will get to do that. And we're going to examine and predict ways to facilitate a transformative learning experience in your own practice. And we've heard from some of you who participated in the first seminar or webinar that this is now the question that's foremost on your mind, is that you're starting to think about, okay, so what does this look like? How do I do this? So we hear you. We're getting there.
Yeah. All right, next. So quickly in the chat box, go ahead and write a few descriptive words or takeaways that you remember from the first session. And let's say you didn't go to the first session, maybe you could even write a little bit about what you remember about experiential education. These are kind of 3 big buckets here. So whichever is, you're leaning towards that feels best for you. What do you remember about the first session? What do you remember about experiential education? And what do you recall about the attributes of a transformational learning experience? Those are 3 big buckets. You don't have to write all day long, just a few words. So, and also just speaking metacognitively, this is something that I start almost all my classrooms with, which is a quick write, where I'm basically activating schema, getting some context, and it also helps if there's anything I need to do in my thinking to regroup the reasons behind it.
We've got to expand this. People are shared experience between teacher and learner. Direct experience teachers often do not know. Yes. Engaging, hands-on, authentic, whatever interest is interesting.
What now what?
Place-based learning. Yes, absolutely. Student-centered, critical reflection, absolutely. Building community, oh yeah. First.
Importance
Okay,
of blending
good.
academic, good.
Good.
Co-constructors, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, it looks like we don't need to review Cole, but you all have it. Thank you for that great review. Moving on. All right, so you've got a solid basis of what experiential education is. I do want to put in a little plug. This is actually a little pet peeve of mine. There is a difference between experiential education and experiential learning, and I want to articulate that really quickly so you have an understanding of the difference between the two. I like to think of experiential education as the what, kind of the methodological understanding, and then I like to think of experiential learning as the how, is the actual instruction. So the difference between curriculum and instruction. If you think about experiential education, there are a ton of different umbrellas that fall under that. So that's a good way of thinking about when you talk about experiential education, you're talking theoretically. When you're talking about experiential learning, you're talking about the learning and the thinking processes.
Yeah.
So just to throw that out there.
Yeah, and so our goal today is to bridge the gap between the two. We're going to bounce back and forth. So the webinar number 1 did a great job on the building the foundation, the theoretical, the philosophical, and we'll be the middle piece, and then the final piece will probably be 100% experiential learning. Although you can't ever eliminate one or the other, but yes. So one of the things that we want to be thinking about throughout today's webinar is that it's not just about the methods. There are some really great experiential learning examples, but it's also about knowing how to use them and when to use them and why to use them. So let's continue to ask ourselves those questions. Just because you have maybe you've got this really great exercise that you do, but it doesn't link to anything else within that class period, and there's no connectivity, it's just going to feel like a fun thing that didn't really dig any deeper. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today. So let's ask ourselves, how much are we creating or maintaining space for viable communication? How much are we creating the opportunity for everybody to dialogue with one another and actually communicate their thinking and their process? Like Nikki was mentioning earlier, metacognitively, she was explaining to all of us, like, okay, here's how I'm experiencing this. How much do we allow students to step back and or participants is almost a better word for it. How much do we share how we're feeling in the moment and what connections we're making in the moment? How much is that part of the learning process?
Yeah, and the next thing that article highlights on how to actually facilitate this transformative learning experience is really collaborating with your students and seeing your students as thinking partners and learning partners. We get into this a little bit in another slide, but you really don't want to assume that you actually know what's best for your students. And I know that sounds crazy because we're supposed to know, we're the teacher, we're supposed to know all of it, but in this type of teaching and this type of process, we don't. We're really co-constructors.
And so just building off of this whole concept of transformative learning experiences, we're looking, we know that we are offering a transformative learning experience when what has just happened, and hopefully this happens during a reflection piece, like in Kolb's loop, the reflective piece comes after an experience potentially, that the participants are beginning to understand other people's perspectives. They're developing, they're expanding their sense of diversity. They're appreciating the all of the multiple perspectives that are being brought by the participants. So yeah, of course, we think from our own point of view, but how often are we allowing the space for everybody to try and look at it from somebody else's point of view and hear and appreciate and respect all of those multiple points of views?
And with that comes a higher level of empathy as well. And that's when you could actually be teaching skills and the knowledge and the understandings that need to go along with empathy, which also is coupled with an enhanced level of communication skills. And that's when you can also be very intentional about teaching written and verbal communication skills. And then there's
I'm going to let you talk about that one too.
okay. And I would actually say one of the most important pieces, and this is something at the college school that we tend to see our 8th grade students leaving with, is this deepened sense and an amazing capacity. They've got a strong self-efficacy. They can advocate for themselves, their confidence with their knowledge and skills moving forward. And that's something that is hard to measure. It's hard to fit under a Common Core standard, but ultimately that's what we're striving for in these types of learning experiences. So I think actually quickly in the chat box, let's go ahead and
just looking at that.
Yeah, let's go ahead. It says visualize yourself creating a transformative learning experience. Think about yourself in your traditional roles, if that's what you do, or in your non-traditional roles, if that's what you do. And I want to ask you, I'm just going to move it to the next slide because I think the question's here. What might you be doing differently, or describe a little bit about where you would land with these particular pieces, thinking about yourself as a facilitator of a transformative learning experience.
And I was just going to mention, as you were talking about, the empathy, and we were talking about looking from other people's perspectives and how that then enhances somebody's communication. Imagine what that might look like in a history classroom or a math classroom. What does that look like when we have students using the content from a traditional classroom, but in service of being able to appreciate where other people are coming from, or looking at the diversity of ideas?
Yeah, thank you, Gordon. I love the hip to hip with your partner or knee to knee with the little ones, cueing physical movement. That's good.
Yes, more student voice, less teacher voice. Yes. Guiding participants to discovery instead of being, yes, absolutely. Intentional reflection, yeah.
Oh my gosh, someone has fun? What? You get to be a part of the learning.
Yes, okay, good. So these are some of the more practical things. What does it look like? Individual, it could be individual, it could be group work, could be exploring a space or topic. It could be recording and reflecting. Absolutely. Good.
Good, okay, so let's take it a little step further and try to connect a little bit with Hahn and Dewey and Kolb. What connections are you making with those 3 theorists and this type of facilitation? I think you've hit on it a lot.
Clear sequencing, absolutely. The sequencing matters, yes. We want to build from where we are as participants, and we want to add to that and bring in new knowledge and then build some more. Yes, the character education piece from Hahn. So important.
Dewey does a lot of communication, social constructivism.
And I think they all recognized how important it is that we bring in our own life experiences, that we're building off of who we are and where we come from and what we know and what we care about.
It's really about telling our narrative and listening to other people's narrative. Building
emotional trust is hard to build. Oh, outside of their comfort zones, yes. That's all the way back to Vygotsky with zone of proximal development. Very good.
Good.
Yes, you're on it.
Yeah, you guys got it. All right, so looks like you've got the connections there. So moving on, think this is kind of the meat of this particular webinar. So you get it, you got the idea, you're moving on. The next webinar is really going to get into the nitty gritty and the nuts and bolts of it all. But right now, I know for me, when I was right in the gray area where I was really bridging the gap between my traditional understanding of teaching and learning to this more experiential approach, I would land in the messiness of but how do you do it? How do I get past this discomfort of trusting the process, and what does the process look like? And so here we've got a slide. We're going to talk through some of these uncertain outcomes and try to help you cut the cord a little bit. So the first bullet point is there will be times as the facilitator, you're taking it moment by moment. I can promise you, I've been doing this for a lot of years, and there are still classes that I teach, and I have no idea what's going to happen next. And really, it's about me being comfortable in my own skin and with my own content to know that I'm going to be able to respond appropriately to how things are, to the energy and the learning that's taking place. Is there anything you want to add?
Well, you know what that makes me think of is when it comes to acting and improv. And in improv only works if you are actually responding to the other person and trying to build off of that. Improv is a total disaster if you come in with something totally pre-scripted, or if you are so worried about what you're going to say next that you're not even paying attention to what the person's saying.
Right.
Yeah.
So trusting your process, trusting that you know what learning and thinking looks like. You know for yourself what rigor and higher order level thinking looks like for you and your particular grade level. I love what Brene Brown says about leaning into the discomfort of the work. And if you're not familiar with that, there is a link that maybe Dan can throw up there. It's Brene's Brown TED Talk on vulnerability. And she's basically talking about showing up and being seen. And it's uncomfortable. But if you frame your community of learners in a way where everyone's going to lean into the discomfort of the work, then you've got like a groundwork of moving forward in a more of a we celebrate mistakes and risk-taking environment. I'd also like to add, do you want to?
Well, I was just going to say that so one of our chat contributions was regarding how challenging it is to create that trusting environment. And this is where we're giving you permission to take the time to really build that community. Use those exercises that just people telling their stories, and either meeting one-on-one or small group or whole group. Take the time to do that, because that's then going to allow you to dig deeper into the things that are going to make the learning more personal, and they're going to be able to work through the struggle and the challenges that come up through this more messy work. They're going to get more comfortable about saying how they're feeling along the way, and you'll be able to respond better. You can't really respond if you don't even have a way for people to share how they're doing.
A good place to start, if you're one of those people who you're done talking about this now and you want some hands-on, I'm ready to try this out. If you go to the Buck Institute website, and I think Dan, if you could cue that up, there are some amazing templates to get you going if you are a lesson planner and you don't want to get stuck in the messiness of this and you want to think about big picture lesson planning for this. There's some amazing resources on the Buck Institute website. Just take a look. You could even look at all their videos and look at their lesson planning resources. But I would say as a beginner, if you're in a traditional classroom, for sure, just pick one thing that you kind of want to cut the cord on. It could be as simple as daily oral language, or just a very simple class meeting. If you're a little more advanced than that, then you want to probably look at a unit structure that you want to look at as potential transformative learning experience. I had a teacher ask me the other day if her students were supposed to be in this transformative learning state the entire day, or if it could just happen for 5 minutes. And did it happen differently for different students? And the answer was yes to most of them. I would say that you want to have each of your students hit a climax, at least of once a day. But it's not going to happen at the same time for everybody, and it's certainly not going to stay plateaued. Or climax for the entire day. So
yeah, absolutely.
And then I want to go to the stop assuming that you know it works for the students. That sounds so anti-intuitive for what it is that we do, but it's true. You need to ask them. You need to monitor. You need to formatively assess all day long. And there's an amazing resource. It's called the Critical Incident Questionnaire. Dan, if you could put that link up. This is for older students and adult students, and I've used it. I'm even using it right now. As an administrator at a school, and it's about me getting a pulse on the learning that's happening. You can use it daily, you can use it weekly, but it is fascinating. Have you ever used it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you find out things that you really don't know, and it's ridiculous how much. I guess because we grew up never really being asked for our own opinions, we forget, and we want to stop that cycle of assuming. It's not healthy, and we really don't know what's working and what isn't. Right. And sometimes it's a wonderful surprise what you find out from the Critical Incident Questionnaire. You find out, oh, that really worked for you, and maybe more than just one person. Yeah.
All right, it's time for you guys to ask some questions. But first, we'd like to model a way to reflect.
Yeah. So this is something that you can do to kind of check in with your learners. We're going to ask you, and hopefully you have some paper with you. We didn't think to mention that in advance, but you'll figure out something. But draw something. Try to visually represent an answer to one of these questions. Can you visually represent a connection that you're making from what we've discussed so far to your practice? Can you draw a question that is coming up for you? Can you draw what is kind of muddy and not totally gelling, and is you have a sense of it, but it's a little bit of a blur? What about the new insights that you're having? A light bulb kind of moment, an aha of sorts. So we're going to give you, and we're suggesting it could be something like an emoji or an icon, or something metaphorical. It could be like a storyboard if it's somewhat sequential, more than one thing at a time. But and we're not only asking you to do this because it's going to help you stop and reflect, but we're also trying to model for you that this is what you might do. I think typically the reflection is saved for the last part of class or the last part of an experience, and often gets cut short and left hanging. We run out of time and we say, oh, well, we didn't have time for the reflection or whatever. So this is a great example of, what if you stop and do it in the middle? What if you do it before the end, when you know you're not going to run out of time? It communicates how important it is. It gives it a much more significant moment than the everybody's packing up to go on to the next thing kind of feel. So if you want to guide reflection, I mean, Nikki and I are modeling for you some questions that you could ask your class. So the connection one is a really key one. Continuity. Like, what if you asked a question at the beginning of class, in the same question in the middle, and then the same question at the end? That has a through line that a lot of students don't experience within especially in a traditional setting, but even in our own lives. How much do we ask ourselves that same question over and over again? Context. Asking people to stop and think, how does this connect to me? How does this connect to my life? How does this connect to what I'm caring about?
And having that share out, having that be public or in a think, pair, share situation.
Yes, this is not always just on your own. It's powerful when you can share it with others. challenging. Can people think from a different point of view? That comes up a lot when you do a share out, but what if you ask them to stop and reflect on what's being meaning, are you find meaning in, and then thinking about coming up with different other perspectives. And then coaching and mentoring, I don't remember this one.
Oh, well, just when you facilitate these other components of reflection, to make sure that you're not just leaving them hanging, that you come back and mentor and coach individuals in the right next steps. All right, so creating the visual representation. I wish we had an opportunity for you all to be able to share your representation.
Yeah.
Perhaps in the chat box you could just give some descriptive words on what it is that you came up with, or if you've got questions, this could be a really good time as well.
Mm-hmm.
Drew a clock. Do I have time to make all lessons transformative? And I'm just going to respond to that. No. That's why you have to pick just one.
Yeah. Yeah, start simple, and but the thing is that it can be transformative for a student when it becomes personal, and it can really surprise students if you haven't done much of this before, where they get to talk about themselves. That can be transformative. It's often the surprise or the difference.
And also, I think I spoke too soon. I said no about the time thing. I'm actually going to retract that, because if you create the entire learning experience to be transformative, then it will be. Like I'm thinking about a unit that is completely project-based or inquiry-based. So I retract that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and we tend to live in these little, short time periods, but to the extent that we can think about, attempt to think more full day or more day to day in the way that we connect with our students. And but yeah, it doesn't have to be some big mountaintop experience in a 50-minute class period.
Oh my gosh, these are so good.
The Padilla Circle.
Sharing power, not to hold it. A ladder or a scaffold, because I'm an experimenter.
Mm-hmm.
If more teachers thought of themselves as researchers or experimenters, these transformative learning experiences would happen more often.
Yeah.
Methods, processes. What are some of the top methods you find most effective in the EL space?
Mm-hmm. One of my new favorites is from the Stanford D School. It's called Design Thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And it has some similarities to PBL, and it's a structure, it's a process that lends itself well to problem solving of any kind, and it automatically pulls in this empathy piece that we're looking for, and asks people to really listen to the person or the people that they're problem solving for. But it could also be that you're solving the problem for there could be all sorts of possibilities for role playing. Like, let's say that the problem exists in a book and you don't have the people from the book there to answer those questions. So then somebody gets to play the part of the people in the book, and you can interview them and figure out how to solve their problem.
Mm-hmm.
And you probably do that before the problem gets solved in the book, but I would put that at the top of my list of some good methods.
Oh my gosh, there are so many. I'm trying to think what my favorite is right now. I think ultimately the best learning method or process that you could possibly do in any EL focused environment is to make sure the groundwork is laid for communication, risk, and being vulnerable. If it takes you 6 weeks to do that, it's worth it, even if you don't get to any content, because whatever content you do get to after that will be a transformative learning experience.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. And that goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, is that it matters more why you are doing the method and how you're doing the method, and to what end. It's that you can take some actually fairly traditional methods and they can become transformative when you are, meeting the hearts of, we tend to focus so much on the minds of the students. When you're meeting the hearts of the students, it happens.
That's good.
Yeah.
All right, we've got one more slide, and this is a big slide too. This could be its own webinar, to be honest. We're going to talk a little bit about assessment, and then we'll have time for questions at the end, where we've got about 5 or 6 more minutes. So quickly, some bullet points on assessment. When you're thinking assessment in EL, you really are thinking formatively. Summatively, you're going to start thinking about portfolios. You're looking at process and growth instead of a grade. You're really looking at self and peer assessment and ongoing feedback. There's another resource, Dan, if you could throw it up there. It's Tony Wagner's Redefining Rigor. He's got a list for critical thinking, and I often use his bullet points for critical thinking as summative assessment rubric indicators. There's also an awesome book called The Smartest Kids in the World, and there's an appendix article which I use all the time, and it's basically what you're supposed to look for in a classroom when student engagement is high and when critical thinking is high. That's a great place to start as well. What else about assessment?
So yeah, about that appendix article. So one of the things they recommend is it's guided so that you could go into a school and use these suggestions from this appendix. And one of the questions or the ideas is go to the students and ask them, what are you learning and why are you learning
Yeah,
it?
how is it relevant?
Yeah, how is it relevant? Can you imagine? I mean, what if somebody came into our classrooms? Would our students know what they were learning and why they were learning it, how it related to their lives? That's to me the ultimate assessment. But the other thing that I wanted to say about our list here of examples is that it's so hard sometimes for us to make the shift from this kind of transmission model or traditional old school model of assessment, because we all, I'm assuming, I mean, unless you were homeschooled, you probably are a product of having been tested and tested and tested. And there's this overwhelming kind of connection in our lives to this, to the kind of assessment that has to narrow things down to here's what's important to know. And that's testable. And that's chosen by an authority figure who, has facilitated possibly this amazing learning experience for you. But then on the test, they pick the things that didn't mean anything to you. And in fact, we have to cram in order to memorize them. And then there's this whole other range of stuff that the students probably learned, that because the teacher doesn't design an assessment that allows for the voice of the student or the participant, will never be heard, will never be assessed. So I love the portfolio example. The self-assessment in peer assessments are so important, absolutely key. I mean, that's because that's when the participants drive the assessment. And even still, if the facilitator is generating the questions, you run the danger of limiting that. So what if the participants are coming up with, how should we assess ourselves? What if they're coming up with the rubric? What if they're the ones who are figuring out how to process and what's going to help them make the most meaning? They're choosing the product that they want to offer as evidence of their learning. It's just a complete reversal of what we grew up with, and it's sometimes hard to make that mental shift, but it just takes practice. You just try it out with one thing, and once you experience the magic of it, it's just, you'll never go back.
It takes time, though. It definitely takes time.
Yeah.
All right, so questions. We're kind of in our last few minutes here, thinking about what other outcomes have come from this. What are your takeaways, and what are what's muddy for you now? What are your pains? What pains you?
Yeah. So we would love to hear through the chat box from you. Are you picking up on certain characteristics or attributes that signal transformative learning, or that as somebody who wants to facilitate a transformative learning experience would make sure were elements in the planning and the execution. I find that in building a classroom culture, it boils down to pattern establishment and pattern interrupts. Yes, I work with each class crew to agree on both. Yeah, and we all have that. It's okay to have routines, but it's also important to break those up and try something different. And it's so real to life.
Could you elaborate a bit on how to lay groundwork for safe communication in classrooms? Some examples of successful activities in establishing this before content. Ooh, that's good. Ooh, there is a book called People Skills by Bolton, I think his last name is. It's an interpersonal communications book that'll help give you some tips on how to lay some groundwork on that. But really, it's exercising and modeling those types of skills. So you could have a day where you start your class with a listen only activity where you're in partners and you ask a question and one person only gets to talk and the other person only listens, and then you switch those roles. There are some really good strategies called Kagan structures, Kagan. Any of those structures would work fabulously at any age level, which is amazing. Check those out, Kagan structures. If you put those into anything, you'll be able to identify with some good communication.
Let me just put in my own 2 cents on that question about communication. One thing that I think has been really helpful that I've seen with groups of all ages is just practicing feedback.
Yes.
Whether it's on an assignment they did, or whether it's on their classroom behavior or their contribution to a team project. When students can get comfortable giving and exchanging feedback, especially constructive feedback, what you could do better, it opens them up to challenge each other and to seek to get even better, as opposed to just try to do whatever they need to do to pass.
Yeah, and I would add to that some good sentence starters that you can use at any grade level are I appreciate and I urge. And if you are modeling that language with your students when someone offers up something, I appreciate blah, 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 I urge blah, blah, blah. And then everyone starts using that language and boom, there you have it. You've got feedback happening right out of the gates.
Now let's look at some of our chat comments. Yeah, it is good to have a toolbox of options that allow you to respond to things that might come up. That's a key piece to this, to any good teaching, is anticipating what might come up and being imaginative.
Yes, Ron Berger's An Ethic of Excellence is perfect. We use that book here at the college school as a foundation of what we do, and it offers a lot of defining what excellence looks like.
Yeah, he's so great. He does some amazing project-based learning with the schools that he consults with. And it's really more service learning, frankly. Service learning, that's another excellent example of experiential learning.
Right. We are actually beyond time. If you need an out, we're happy to entertain for a little bit longer, but don't feel like you have to stay connected. I just learned recently that I am experiential educated, and it's helped me realize this.
Oh, that's awesome. Cool. Yes. People are often already doing experiential learning, and it's already there. There's just endless ways to strengthen it and explore it
and be confident in it.
Yes. I want to give students control, allow them to make a rubric for a writing assignment and decide what yes. Oh,
it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. It's also when Winnie and I worked together as professors, we would often get bogged down in, oh my gosh, I have to do this. And then we'd look at each other and be like, actually, the students need to do it. And so when you get to that point where you're starting to feel anxious as the facilitator, think about cutting the cord and giving that responsibility to your students. It's a
Yeah.
beautiful, beautiful thing.
I actually did that this semester. I thought, oh, I don't want to have to deal with attendance and participation. And I thought, oh, I'm going to have my students be in charge of that. And so they've come up with how they want to measure that. And they're the ones tracking it. And they're communicating to the class about what's going on. And people are asking them questions. And it's just, the weight has been lifted. And they love it. It is so empowering. And I'm always going to do it that way.
You know, one of my leadership courses I taught in higher education, I came with a blank syllabus and told them they had to come up with what their learning outcomes were for the course and what their rules were for the course, and took some time. It was messy,
but I
but it was
imagine
awesome.
that only worked because you didn't have a specific answer you wanted to get them to.
Mhm.
And because otherwise that's more of an argument than it is facilitating.
Wait, do you have any more questions? Anything else that's on your mind? In the next webinar, they will be diving deeper into actually how you do this and what it looks like in the classroom. It's hard for us actually to
hold off
on that.
Hopefully we didn't go too far with our examples.
Now it looks like the Q&A is starting to slow down a little bit, but I did just want to take a moment to thank you both and thank our attendees today for coming and really digging into this topic deeper than we've done with any of our other webinars or anything at AEE. We think it's very important. We think that honestly this is part of a big change happening in education, and that when we raise the bar, when we expect more from our students, like coming up with their own learning outcomes or actually being able to articulate what their learning outcomes, or, and this blew my mind when you said it, is just that simple question of what are you learning and why is it relevant as a form of assessment? Like this is a big deal. And we're very appreciative to have experts in the field like you both talking to us about this. We're very appreciative that everybody has joined with us to engage in this conversation, and we hope that it really does help transform your teaching, your classroom, and your students. So thanks everybody for being here, and thank you very much, Winnie and Nikki, for
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Yes.